What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince. Still talking about Helene here, early 2025. Got you in Watauga County, North Carolina today. And this video is going to be a little bit different. Actually, going to be going back in time today through the wonder of some really cool aerial photography. What just faded in there as an aerial photograph of this part of Watauga County from October of 1940. In August of 1940, there was a storm related to the remnants of a hurricane that came on shore from the Atlantic, I believe, that produced some pretty impressive effects in Watauga County. Folks were so taken aback by what had happened that, among other things, they collected a large amount of aerial photography after that storm just to see what the land looked like. And it's pretty interesting to compare some of the effects of that storm to what happened this time around with Helene. And why have I chosen this particular part of Watauga County? That's very much a Helene reason, and it's located right in the middle of the screen. If we had Google Earth imagery from after the storm, it hasn't come out for this area yet, we would see the effects of a landslide. It would look something like this. It would start up there in the edge of those trees and make its way down actually across that house there, coming right by the edge of another little building there. And if you could actually see the outline of the house, it would have been altered somewhat, such that part of the house would have been kind of knocked off the foundation like that. And it actually got a car pushed up on its roof by this particular landslide. You, in fact, probably have seen a video of this landslide. It absolutely made the rounds after the storm, and for good reason. One of the most impressive landslide videos out there. Rachel Wilkes is the name on the Instagram account. I've seen the name Rachel Mosher associated with this video as well. If you go online and Google Sugar Grove mudslide, you will absolutely see this. And news agencies, Facebook, the Weather Channel, wherever you like, it was everywhere, and with good reason. Absolutely incredible to see something like this. And it starts out, if you do what I've done here, I actually took a bunch of screenshots of it because we've been talking about this in professional conferences. Geologists are actually studying this video to try to get a better sense of how slides like this work. And at the very beginning of it, we'll zoom in here real quick. Up there towards the top of that image, you can actually see the early stages of that slide. In the background, it's still kind of a solid, intact mass, but as it makes its way down slope and picks up speed, that all changes very significantly. And the part that is really so breathtaking to see is something like this. It just sort of explodes into this wall of mud and rocks and gravel. And this, of course, is what continued moving downhill and caused all the damage to that house. The folks filming this, I would be fascinated to know, first of all, how they knew to look up slope at the time. I've like heard this thing starting or something like that. And also, I mean, this is as close calls get, and the images you see right now, of course, tell you that. I mean, this was feet away from having been a very different outcome. But probably the most fascinating part of this is that the video also shows you where this slide came from, and it wasn't very big in the sense of other landslides that occurred during Helene. You can actually get a sense right here up in the corner of how big the scar that produced that slide was, and you can see it kind of rolled out across the yard here. And perhaps the most interesting part of all is the fact that the grass is still there. All of that mud and rock and everything else coming down slope, it didn't even tear up the yard. As it turns out, slides like this in Watauga County, North Carolina, are a thing, particularly with, of course, these extreme precipitation events. Nobody knows exactly how they work or why they behave in this way, but it is something that goes on in this location. And the reason I want to talk about this one is that if you went back in time to 1940 and looked at the little stream channel that is kind of in the upper left of the screen here, there would have been a big streak of mud and debris coming down that stream channel from a similar slide that had happened further uphill as a result of that 1940 storm. And if we move back to Google Earth here, we will now fade that aerial imagery in. And yes, it's small, just like the one that happened with Helene. But sure enough, right where the hand is moving there, that would have been sort of a wave of mud coming down the slope, almost exactly like what happened with Helene there. Difference is, of course, there's not a house on the way this time. A lot of differences. There's not very many trees on the landscape here. And if you look at the present day tree cover, it's almost hard to believe actually that in 2024, with so many more people in the world, everything else, there's actually a whole lot more tree coverage in a lot of Western North Carolina. But we'll bring that back in here and actually zoom in on that little slide right there. And that is really just kind of a dead ringer for what happened just a few hundred feet down the slope here. So let's see if we draw both of them in at once here. And so we have the first one coming down. I guess I don't want to hit the edge of the building there folks were filming from. It would look something like that. I don't actually know how far down the slope this particular slide continued. Hopefully some new Google Earth imagery will pop up here soon enough. So we'll draw that one in here. Okay, then we're going to bring in the 1940 photo, and we'll actually do the same thing with the 1940 slide further up the slope. So it started out there, and it actually got into the stream channel here and sort of followed that down, and it looks like that one actually stopped right around where the house sits today. So believe it or not, how many years apart? 80, what, 84 years apart, almost exactly, August to September. That particular spot where that house sits in Watauga County, Sugar Grove, North Carolina, received two mudslides coming across it from the remnants of hurricanes that came on shore and interacted with the mountain landscape and caused absolutely catastrophic rainfall. So it's almost like a lightning striking twice or something like that. But it gives you the sense, as well it should, that in this part of Western North Carolina, this is just kind of a thing that happens, right? The nature of the topography, the fact that weather can come either out of the Gulf of Mexico or off the Atlantic, particularly in the form of low pressure systems like tropical systems and interact with the mountains. Every now and then you're going to get one of these 15, 20 or more inch rain events, and it's going to produce effects like this, right? So first and foremost, back to these slides themselves. Not very big. They leave a little kind of a little divot in the landscape. I'm going to talk about that with LiDAR here in just a few minutes. They send sort of a big wash of mud out over the land. It's not water. It's very much the soil that slid off the side of the mountain. It turned into a liquid once it started moving. And then after that soil moved down the slope, it doesn't really do much to the slope in its wake, right? As you saw from the shots from the video, and there's like grass that's still there. So what what are these landslides that were so prevalent here in Watauga County? With Helene, there were several other ones, and of course back in 1940 as well. Going to draw that one out in paint here. It absolutely does require a diagram. There's really no no amount of description that will make it make any sense. But once it's drawn out and you see kind of like what these things leave behind in the landscape, we'll take it just over the ridge here in Watauga and look at a place that had quite literally hundreds, no exaggeration, of these little slides and compare it to what it looks like today as well. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so what kind of a landslide starts as a fairly innocuous looking little thing and then suddenly explodes into this crazy wave of mud and rocks that will knock a house off a foundation? Reasonable question, one that requires sort of a cross-sectional look at a slope like one you might see up in Watauga County, North Carolina. I'll try to do the usual block diagram kind of thing here with this. The key point is that we're going to have some soil sitting up on top of bedrock that's going to be down below that sort of thin covering of soil. We can go ahead and make ourselves a green land surface there, and go ahead and kind of finish out the soil horizon there and rock and everything. Okay, sounds good. So when uh when a slide like this starts moving, a lot of times end up something like this, a little, just kind of like slab of soil is going to break loose from the soil underneath it. Frequently, it happens where the soil's actually touching the rock, right? And that little slab of material is just going to come out and start sliding down the slope and not going to look too crazy at this point. And we can kind of keep our colors going. Here's something like that. Okay, so we got the beginnings here of our slide, and what I'm coloring in here is going to be sort of the scar area that it's going to leave behind. And right off the bat, you'll see this kind of like a steep lip almost where that thing has pulled away and it's now making its way down the slope. But everything is still all right until, of course, it is not. No one knows exactly why this happens, but extremely saturated soil, like you would have had on a mountainside during Helene, with just a little bit of agitation, that saturated soil can turn into what looks like a liquid. Now it's still the soil, it's still little pieces of sand and rock and everything else, but they're not able to kind of hold together anymore. And even though it still weighs as much as soil does, it will move and behave exactly like water, which of course is what you saw in the video there. And that's what allowed that slide to move so effectively and go down there and do so much damage to that house. So we'll kind of try to channel Hokusai here a little bit or something like that. I don't know. But at this point, it's all going to look like just a big wave of mud and soil that's making its way down the slope. Gone is that earlier sort of intact kind of block slab shape that it had, and now it's off to the races. And basically, you want to get out of its way. So actually, use a little bit of a different color up here. That kind of finish our scar area here. Get that looking pretty good. So at this point in the game, once that material has started flowing like that, it's basically emptied that little scar area of all the soil that used to be there. So that's now just kind of this like a divot, I'll call it, on the side of the mountain there. And you've got this big crazy mud wave that's sort of surging its way down the slope. And again, even though it looks like a liquid, it is still very much all of the same stuff that was in the soil there to start with, right? So you do not want to be in the way of this because it's not going to be like water hitting you. It's going to be something like nearly twice the weight of water hitting you if it does happen to come into contact with you. And that wave of material just makes its way on down the mountain, and because it's moving so fluidly, it really doesn't leave anything behind. In fact, usually all you see left behind is something like I'm drawing here. There'll be like a little kind of a little streak of mud and maybe some small rocks on the edges of where it traveled, and then in the area that it actually flowed across, you might see a little bit of discoloration on the ground surface, but it's mostly gone. And kind of the leftovers from an event like this, what you would see if you were to be looking at this sometime in the geologic future, is going to be just just this little scar here on the side of the hill, right? And it's going to have like that real steep top edge there, and then it's going to kind of flatten out, moving down the slope. Now, that transition from kind of sliding slab of material into mud wave, again, that receives a lot of study. I did a video about that recently. If you want to get into the finer points of why debris flows are thought to flow, you can check that out. But suffice it to say, it only happens with saturated soil, right? So this is only something that you're going to see in a Helene type of event. And to take that step even further, you probably have to have certain conditions of the soil here, which would be little fragments of rock and sand mixed with clay and things like that. You probably have to have almost like the right composition or ratio of materials to make that work in that way. Um, it still is. It's moving soil. A lot of people saw that Sugar Grove video. They asked if a dam broke up there or something like that. There's not a dam or a pond or anything else. It literally is just the side of the mountain. It just acts in a different way when you put 20 or so inches of rain on it in too short of a period of time, right? So take it back to Google Earth now and talk a little bit more about what features like this look like in the landscape and how you can study the ones that happened in the fairly recent past. Okay, so that's the basic idea of one of these kind of Watauga County specials right here, which are small landslides that are associated with extreme ground saturation. They flow like a liquid because of that, but just probably due to the nature of the topography here and where the slides start, they don't always turn into what we would call a debris flow, at least in the very long run out destructive sense, like we saw in so many other places with Helene. And the calling card of these things that you can see left over in the landscape is that little that little kind of divot, that little scar. In fact, the image from the video does a very nice job of showing what what that's going to look like if you get to a place after one of these things happened. It's going to be maybe semicircular. Sometimes they're kind of oval shaped, but they're not very big and they're not very deep either. These landslides aren't moving huge amounts of material down the slope, and you can see this little scar they tend to leave behind in LiDAR imagery. So we'll bring in some LiDAR in the background there and fade that aerial photography away. And this is pretty interesting to me as somebody who spends a lot of time looking at the scars of old landslides in the landscape and trying to figure out what happened and when. Right there where the hand is circling, you can see just a little dark area there. That's kind of that steep lip, what we call a head scarp, up at the top of the area that slid. And if we fade that aerial photo back in, you can see the slide starting there. There's another little one there. And it just has the very, very faintest little scar there. If I or others were looking at landslide history of this area without this aerial photography, chances are we would not even pick up on those features as being landslides, right? Now, when you use aerial photography elsewhere in Watauga, it gets a little bit more interesting, and you get the sense again that this is very much a Watauga County thing. And the type of behavior that you saw in that video, the type of behavior that occurred here in 1940 was, again, extremely widespread in this area. And if cruise over here, you can probably even from this point see an incredible number of scars in the landscape. In fact, an almost unbelievable number of them. Really unusual to look at. I don't think we saw anything like this with Helene, if for no other reason that there really isn't mountain topography quite like this that is completely bare of trees today in an area that was strongly impacted by Helene. There's a few exceptions to that, but as you will see here momentarily, this looks really, really different. Just the ground surface and what's on it from what you have today in Watauga County. And if you think back to the little diagram I drew in the still shots of the video, something like you'd see right here fits the description perfectly. There's kind of a scar there, and you can see that faint sort of streak of soil where everything came out and slid down slope. Didn't really carve a furrow like a debris flow does, but you can see a little bit of soil left behind. And if we fade this away, you can actually see that faint little scar there again in the LiDAR imagery. Now, does that look very extreme? No. In fact, if you went there in person without LiDAR imagery and this aerial photography, you might not even be able to tell that there was like a mudslide there, a small debris flow 84 years ago. But sure enough, there's one right there. It's got a neighbor right down here. There's even a really tiny little one right there where the hand is. And if you fade it out, you can see there's sort of a little divot in the land there as well. If we come over kind of the next hollow over here, see sort of the same thing going on, but to a much greater extreme, absolutely pockmarked with all of these little scars. And what do those look like in the aerial photography? Pretty impressive. If you had been here in person at the time, you would have wondered what had just happened. If this happened today, people would be flying the drones over it, flying helicopters over it, just trying to capture the effects to the landscape from this event, right? So what you're seeing now is the results of a storm 84 years ago. The land acted the same, at least in terms of how the landslides moved. But what sorts of things are different in this area? Well, let's fade this 1940 photo away. It's very green. Google Earth has left us with a boundary in the imagery there. Let's see. There we go. That works pretty well. There is almost complete forest cover on that location today. It was very much agricultural, and in fact, agricultural all the way up to the top of the mountain there in 1940. And one gets the impression, and this is certainly something that we have seen elsewhere in Western North Carolina and beyond in the Appalachians, you get more landslides when there aren't trees on the landscape. And it suggests that the nature of the topography here is, in effect, it's sort of like you would say it's used to having trees on it. Just the way that the slopes have evolved, their steepness, the way the drainages are laid out. So a wholesale tree removal for agriculture, kind of like you see here, absolutely does produce a destabilizing effect. So if you went up in the woods here today, if you were not a person trained in estimating tree age or something like that, you'd think this was the great ancient forest or whatever else. But less than 100 years ago, not only was it not forest, it was farm fields that were absolutely full of these little debris flow type landslides. So interesting to consider how change comes to pass in a landscape like this, as well as the consequences of past events. How would you even know that something like this had happened here, and it might be something that you need to think about? Kind of a good question there. It's what geological surveys do, and that, of course, is why I am always on here talking about landslides. I actually do this as a job. I work with Appalachian landslide consultants out of Asheville, and this is a big part of what we do. And folks in Western North Carolina and beyond have been doing landslide mapping and inventorying like this for years and years, just to try to keep some of this information on people's minds. Of course, we don't see it happening every year. We don't even see it happening every decade. But when something like a Helene or something like a 1940 happens, it's a pretty significant thing. And of course, we are still in the early stages, particularly in places in the high country, Watauga County, Avery, Mitchell, Yancey. This is going to be going on the cleanup, kind of building back, whatever, for years and years, right? So it's important to keep this stuff on people's minds. It's kind of an interesting final detail here. The last professional presentation I gave at a conference was in Asheville, North Carolina. It was in April 2024. 1:30 p.m. right after lunch there, using high resolution LiDAR imagery, air photos, and historical documents to explore the slope failure legacy several extreme precipitation events in Appalachia. It's very strange to look back on that title and the fact that that was done in Asheville. Didn't see a Helene coming. Of course, when you work on this kind of stuff, you're aware that something like that can happen. But until you see it happen, even if you look at all these photos and LiDAR imagery and whatever else, like it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't resonate. And so, having now seen one of these events, of course, it's very important to capture what happened, record it, and try to do your best at least to make sure that people down the road will have some of this information on their minds when they're doing decision making and thinking about places to live in the mountains and things like that. Right. So, interesting to look back on the past, both early 2024 and well beyond here, to say the least at this point. Going to do a few more of these landslide history videos. Watauga County is not the only place that had an outrageous event like this, whose traces are essentially lost today. So we're going to try to keep rolling on that theme. It's pretty interesting, and it's again a big part of making sure that what happened here stays on folks' minds going down the road. So hope you check out that next video when it comes along.